Welcome back, everyone, to the Elderly Confessions channel. My wife was hospitalized for a month, and not a single family member visited her. But as soon as she was discharged, my mother immediately asked for $70 million to buy my younger brother a bike. I gave a cold laugh, asking, "Don't you feel any shame saying that, mother?" That night, the third-floor hospital corridor was illuminated in a cold, stark white, with a smell of antiseptic so strong it was hard to breathe. The sound of gurney wheels rolling back and forth echoed rhythmically through the silence. It made one's heart feel even more uneasy. I sat in front of the operating room, my hands clasped so tightly they turned pale, my eyes fixed on the red light above the door that remained lit. My wife, Lan An, was inside. My name is Min Kwan, and I am 38 years old. My wife and I have been married for 10 years, building everything we have from scratch. When we first married, we rented a room of less than 20 square meters in a small alley. It leaked during the rainy season and felt like an oven in the summer heat. Back then, Lan An worked as an accountant for a small wood shop while helping me run furniture supply orders everywhere. There were days when we would eat cold rice with fried eggs, counting every penny of our capital, yet we could still laugh together. Yet now, the woman who endured hardship by my side for 10 years is lying on the operating table in critical condition. Near 11 p.m., the doctor stepped out, took off his mask, and looked at me very seriously. The family came to the hospital a bit late. The gallbladder is severely inflamed with signs of complications. Thankfully, you made it in time. A few hours more could have easily led to an abdominal infection. Quote, hearing that, my legs nearly went weak. I nodded repeatedly, my throat tightening so much I couldn't say a word. The doctor went back inside to continue the surgery, while I stood frozen in the hallway. My phone in my pocket vibrated again. It was the head of our company's sales department. "Mr. Kwan, the partner is holding up our shipment. They said if we don't show up tomorrow to sign the confirmation, there's a very high chance we'll lose the contract." I squeezed my eyes shut. On one side is the company we spent years building, and on the other is my wife, lying in the operating room, her life hanging in the balance. I took a deep breath and said with a hoarse voice, "Please, just try to delay it for me. I'll be there tomorrow morning." Quote, after hanging up, I felt completely drained. I slumped onto the chair, burying my face in my hands. In my 10 years of marriage, it was the first time I felt so helpless. In my moment of panic, I thought of my mother. I picked up the phone and called Mrs. Han. It rang for a long time before she picked up. My mother's voice on the other end sounded very calm, not at all like someone who had just heard her daughter-in-law was in emergency surgery. "Hello? What is it, Kwan?" "Mom, Lan An is in emergency surgery. The doctor said the situation isn't looking good. Could you come to the hospital to help me?" There was a 2-second silence on the other end before my mother replied, "I'm already at Fuck's house watching Cuban." I froze. "What's wrong with Cuban, Mom? How high has his fever been since this afternoon?" "Just a little over 37 degrees. He's already taken fever medicine. He's watching cartoons now." I was stunned for a few seconds. My wife is lying in the operating room, and my nephew only has a slight fever, yet my mother chose to be over there. I tried to keep my voice calm, but Fuck's wife is there too, Mom. My mother immediately cut me off. Having me there gives her peace of mind. Besides, Cuban is so attached to me. He cries if I'm not around. I gripped the phone so hard my hand hurt. "Lan An is in surgery. The doctors are taking care of her. If I come there, I'd just be standing in the hallway. What good would that do? You just take care of your wife." After saying that, my mother lowered her voice to chide me slightly. "You're a grown man. Why are you panicking over a little thing?" The call ended, but I stood there holding the phone for a long time. That was the only feeling I had at that moment. For years, Lan An never complained about my family's affairs. When my mother had back pain, it was my wife who took her for x-rays and bought her medicine. When Fuck's family lacked money for their child's tuition, it was also Lan An who quietly transferred the money. On Cuban's birthday, my wife even personally ordered an electric toy car worth nearly $10 million just because my mother said her grandson deserved the best. Yet while she lay on the operating table, the thing my mother cared about was a grandson with a 37-degree fever. I couldn't accept it, so I called Min Fuck, my younger brother. He picked up quickly, but his voice sounded annoyed, as if I were bothering him. "What is it?" "Your sister-in-law is in the emergency room. Can you come to the hospital to help me for a bit?" There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, then a blunt reply. "You take care of her yourself. Things are chaotic here at home. Cuban just has a mild fever tonight." Is a child having a fever not normal? Besides, thou is stressed, and I have to take care of her. After saying that, he hung up immediately. I stood in the hospital hallway listening to the dial tone, feeling empty inside. It started raining outside, and the wind blowing through the windows felt freezing. I sat down, looked up at the white ceiling, and felt a stinging sensation in my nose. Just then, hurried footsteps echoed at the end of the hallway. An older woman, still wearing her raincoat, ran frantically toward me. Her hair was almost completely wet, and her sandals were covered in rainwater. It was my mother-in-law. As soon as Mrs. Thuan saw me, she panted. "Where is Lan? Is the surgery over yet?" I jumped up, and before I could say anything, she grabbed my hand. Her hand was freezing from the rain. "Don't be afraid, I'm here now." Just that one sentence nearly made me burst into tears right there in the hallway. Mrs. Thuan pulled a plastic chair close to the operating room door and set her bag down at her feet. In her bag, she had a container of warm porridge, a thermos of warm water, some new towels, a set of soft clothes for Lan, and the stack of insurance papers that I didn't even remember where I had left. She had rushed over so quickly that her raincoat was still dripping water onto the floor, but her actions were composed and calm, as if she were used to stepping up to handle everything during emergencies. I looked at her, my throat tight. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have been by Lan's side, but there's a major issue at the company." Mrs. Thuan didn't utter a word of blame. She just handed me a dry towel and said softly, "Wipe your face. You're standing here, but you look like you've lost your mind. If she wakes up and sees you like this, she'll only worry more. If you need to handle company work, go ahead, I'm here." That sentence made me feel even more ashamed. I am Lan's husband, yet, at the very moment she needed me most, I was torn between two conflicting responsibilities. On one side was my wife who had just survived a crisis, and on the other, the biggest contract of the year. If I lost it, it wouldn't just be a loss for the company, but dozens of employees would also be affected. But no matter the reason, seeing my mother-in-law sitting there quietly, I still felt I owed Lan Ann too much. Near dawn, the lights in the operating room finally turned off. The doctor stepped out to announce that the surgery was finished. Lan Ann was out of immediate danger, but she needed close monitoring because of the severe infection. Mrs. Thuan clasped her hands to her chest, her eyes red, but she didn't cry out loud. As for me, I let out a long sigh of relief, feeling as if I had just been pulled up from the abyss. When Lan Ann was wheeled into the recovery room, her face was pale, her lips cracked, and an IV was still in her hand. I stepped closer, leaned down, and called out softly, "I'm here, can you hear me?" Her eyelids flickered. After a long while, they finally opened, and the first thing she asked wasn't about her pain or the surgery, but about the company. "How is it?" I felt a tightness in my heart as I listened. The woman who had just been on the operating table for hours woke up still thinking about work, about our shared burden. I forced a smile and took her ice-cold hand in mine. "It's fine, don't worry, your only job now is to get better." Lan Ann looked at me, her eyes tired but still trying to soften. Mrs. Thuan stood by, quickly grabbing a cotton swab to dab water on her daughter's lips. She scolded her gently, "Just woke up and asking about work. Why worry about the world when you can't even look after yourself?" Lan Ann smiled weakly, a smile so pale that I had to turn away to hide my stinging eyes. Seeing that, I involuntarily remembered the early days of our marriage. Back then, Lan Ann told me something I still haven't forgotten to this day. We can be poor, we can struggle, as long as when one falls, the other doesn't let go. That year, I just laughed, thinking it was only the affectionate words of a young wife. But it wasn't until tonight that I truly understood the weight of those words. The first 3 days after surgery felt as long as a whole month. Lan Ann was in so much pain. Each time the painkillers wore off, her face would turn pale, and sweat would bead on her forehead. Mrs. Thuan hardly left the hospital for a single step. She asked the doctor about every medication, every IV drip schedule, and every meal suitable for post-surgery recovery. Once, when I returned to the room near noon, I saw her leaning over, feeding Lan Ann spoonfuls of thin porridge. Her daughter is over 30, yet in her mother's eyes, she is still as small as she once was. The next afternoon, my father-in-law, Mr. Niem, also stopped by. He didn't say much, just stood by the door, watching Lan Ann sleep for a long time. Then he pulled me to the end of the hallway and quietly placed a thick envelope in my hand. I hurriedly pushed it back. "Dad, I can't accept this. My company can manage on its own." Mr. Niem looked at me, his voice low but very firm. "Just keep it. Husband and wife are one family. Don't let pride get in the way during hard times. If we can't help much, at least let us ease some of your pressure." I bowed my head, feeling both grateful and bitter in my heart. My in-laws didn't ask how much I had earned, didn't blame me for not being enough of a husband. They just silently stood behind me to lend a hand. Meanwhile, my phone remained strangely silent. It wasn't until the second night that my mother texted a single line, "Is Lan Ann done with her surgery? Let me know once it's over so I can have peace of mind." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "My wife is out of danger now, Mom." A few minutes later, my mother only sent a praying hands emoji and said nothing more. As for Fuck, my younger brother, he didn't ask about his sister-in-law at all, but he sent a photo to the family group of Cubans sitting in a new toy car, with a caption that the little general was feeling better and demanding a gift from grandma. My mother immediately dropped a heart reaction. She even messaged that her grandson should cheer up so he can get well soon. I looked at my phone screen, then over to Lan Ann, who was lying dozing on the hospital bed. On one side is a mother-in-law staying up every night to wipe down her daughter. On the other side is my own mother, busy being happy because her grandson no longer has a mild fever. For the first time in my life, I clearly saw the boundary between genuine love and taking things for granted. From that moment on, a crack began to form in my heart. It wasn't noisy or explosive, but it was smoldering and chilling. I knew that after this illness, things in my family could never be the same again. On the third night at the hospital, after Lan Ann had fallen asleep for a bit, I went out to the hallway to sit alone. The white light shone onto the cold tiled floor, foot traffic thinned out, and only the sound of a nurse's slippers occasionally echoed in the long, vacant space. I leaned my back against the wall and closed my eyes, but my mind could not find peace. The more I watched my mother-in-law bustling about for her daughter, the more I remembered the early years when my wife and I started our business, remembering a debt that seemed small, but later turned into a noose tightening around our lives. Back then, Lan Ann and I had nothing in our hands. Our first office was just an old rented room located deep in an alley. The walls were stained with dampness. In the rainy season, water seeped through the door gaps, and in the summer, it was stifling hot. Inside, there were only 2 wooden tables bought from a liquidation sale, an old computer that kept freezing, a few material samples leaned against the wall, and a floor fan that rattled from morning till night. I went to meet clients, while Lan Ann stayed home to prepare quotes, call the workshop, check goods, and keep the books. Many nights we worked until 2 or 3 a.m., yet we still had to wake up early the next morning to deliver samples. Our starting capital was always short, barely making ends meet. When we got our first order, the client requested a deposit for materials, but we only had a few million left in our account. I still clearly remember that afternoon, sitting in front of our rented room, phone in hand, not knowing who to call. Lan Ann sat beside me, silent for a long time, then said, "Maybe we should try asking your side of the family. We don't need much, just enough to get through this hurdle." I hesitated before calling Fuck. Back then, he was still single, working as a salesman at an appliance store, with a modest salary but no heavy responsibilities. When I told Fuck I needed to borrow some money to stock goods, he hesitated for a moment then said, "I only have 10 million in savings, take it for now, just don't forget me when you're doing better later." When I took the 10 million from my younger brother's hand, I was truly moved. I patted his shoulder and said something very sincere. "I am grateful to you. Once things are better for us, I definitely won't let you lose out." Lan Ann was also grateful to Fuck and even cooked a small meal herself to invite him over. That day, my wife picked out the best piece of braised meat for Fuck, smiling kindly, just thanking him. "When the company improves, we will repay both the principal and the favor." But sometimes people aren't afraid of owing money, only of owing favors to those who don't know when to stop. After the first order, the company gradually gained more clients. My wife and I didn't get rich overnight, but life started to become less of a struggle. We returned the 10 million to Fuck as soon as we had the money and even gifted him a new phone as a thank you. I thought that was settled, but my mother didn't think so. From then on, whenever Fuck had any trouble, Mom would always say the same thing. "If it weren't for the youngest one's 10 million back then, would you too have what you have today?" At first, I even felt that what Mom said was partly true. After all, Fuck really did help me during my time of difficulty. When Fuck quit his job, I sent him living expenses for several months. Fuck opened a small coffee shop and then suffered a loss. I stepped up to pay the outstanding rent for the premises. Fuck said he wanted to take an online sales course. Lan Ann transferred the tuition fee. Every single time, my mother would call beforehand. Her voice was both pleading and reproachful. "Your younger brother is stuck. You two are the older brother and sister. Can you really just watch him suffer?" Once, when Lan Ann was up late balancing the books, my mother called asking for money for Fuck to upgrade his phone. She said his old phone took bad pictures, no one watched his sales live streams, and you need decent gear to do business properly. I was still hesitating when Mom sighed. "Back then, he emptied all his savings to give to you. Now he needs a phone and you two are still calculating?" Lan An sat right next to me and heard every word clearly. She bowed her head for a long time, then silently opened her banking app to transfer the money to Fuck. After the transfer, my wife just said softly, "Consider it helping him one more time. After all, Cuban is still small. If his family struggles too much, the child suffers." It was because of that sentence that for many years I lulled myself to sleep. I thought that since we were better off, helping my brother a little was fine. I thought my mother favored Fuck because he was the youngest and never mature, so she loved him more. I thought Lan An's silence meant she was okay with it. But I was wrong. My wife's silence wasn't because she didn't hurt, but because she was trying to keep my family from breaking apart. Then the help gradually turned into an obligation. Fuck lacked tuition money for his child, he called me. Fuck owed money for goods, he called Lan An. Fuck had his landlord demand rent. My mother would stand up and cry again. There were months when the money we transferred to Fuck was more than what we spent on our own family. But strangely, my mother never said a word to Fuck about being sensible, trying hard, or standing on his own feet. She only ever turned to me, saying, "You are the older brother, you must support your younger brother. He is the youngest, he is weaker than you." The more he was supported, the deeper Fuck sank. He changed jobs constantly, and every plan sounded great, but after a few months, he would quit. When he needed money, he called us brother and sister so sweetly. When he had a little extra, he would brag as if he were very capable himself. Once I reminded him to be thrifty, he laughed dismissively. "What do you two lack now? I'm just borrowing a little. Why are you making it such a big deal?" Quote, that statement bothered me, but I let it go because my mother stepped in and brought up the 10 million dong debt from years ago again. Without Fuck's help in the beginning, could your company have been built? When people drink water, they must remember the source. Don't get ahead and forget your roots. That night, sitting in the hospital hallway, I looked through the glass and saw Lan An lying on her side, her face pale after surgery. That woman helped me build everything, stayed up countless nights, and endured pressure countless times. Yet in my mother's eyes, all her efforts were wiped clean by Fuck's 10 million dong. I suddenly felt a bitter lump in my throat. We had paid back that 10 million from years ago a long time ago. Perhaps what remains unpaid is the greed nurtured in the name of family. And for the first time, I wondered if, by continuing to turn a blind eye, I would one day push Lan An out of my life just to keep the peace for my own mother's house. Lan An stayed in the hospital longer than expected. Initially, the doctor said if recovery went well, she could go home to continue monitoring in about 10 days. But by the 6th day after surgery, her wound showed signs of a mild infection. She had a low-grade fever, and her abdominal pain increased. Rising inflammatory markers led the doctor to keep her to switch antibiotics and monitor her closely. I felt heavy-hearted listening to the doctor's explanation, because every extra day Lan An stayed in the hospital was another day she had to endure pain. And for me, I saw even more clearly the terrifying emptiness of our home. That month, I was almost torn in two. During the day, I ran back and forth between the company, the warehouse, and the hospital. Some days, less than 10 minutes after leaving her room, a client would call to rush a contract. Some days, while sitting in a meeting with partners, my phone would show Mrs. Thuan's name, reporting that Lan An had a fever again. I would apologize to my partners and run outside to take the call. Hearing my mother-in-law's voice trying to stay calm, "Keep working, I'm just calling so you know. I'm already by her side." By evening, I would return to the hospital, so exhausted I just wanted to collapse. Mrs. Thuan would often leave a lunchbox in an insulated bag for me. Sometimes it was squash soup with minced meat, sometimes lightly braised fish, or just boiled vegetables with sesame salt. She never spoke words of blame, but that very thoughtfulness made my heart ache. Once, I held the still warm lunchbox. I murmured, "I've caused you and Dad so much trouble." Mrs. Thuan only replied, "As long as you still love your wife, that's enough. The most troublesome thing in the world isn't caring for the sick, it's leaving the sick abandoned." That sentence wasn't said harshly, but it fell into my heart like a stone. Mr. Niem, my father-in-law, would also occasionally bring food up. He wasn't used to expressing emotions. Every time he came, he would just set the bag on the table and ask briefly, "How many spoonfuls did she manage to eat today?" If Lan An is asleep, he stands by the door watching his daughter for a moment before quietly leaving. One day he met me at the hospital parking lot, looked at my haggard face, handed me a water bottle and said, "If you're tired, sit down and catch your breath. If the caregiver collapses, who will take care of her?" Quote, my throat tightened as I listened, because it was such silent yet sincere concern. Meanwhile, for nearly a month, my mother never visited the hospital, though she still called. But those calls were so short and cold that they became more painful the more I heard them. The first time she called, her first question was, "How is the company doing lately, son?" I paused for a few seconds and replied, Lan Ann still has a fever, Mom. My mother just muttered, There are doctors for sickness, but if the company runs into trouble, that's hard. You must keep a tight grip on it. Quote, the second time she called, it was still about the company. Are customers canceling orders? Are you able to collect payments? I heard Fuck say business is very difficult lately. Quote, I sat right by the hospital bed, watching Lan Ann close her eyes in pain after an injection, and suddenly felt my mother's questions were sharp as knives. She didn't ask if her daughter-in-law had been able to eat, didn't ask if the surgical wound was healing, didn't ask if she was able to sleep last night. She only worried whether our source of money was being shaken. Fuck had completely disappeared. Not a single call to check in, not a text message to his sister-in-law. He didn't even bother to send a cheap basket of fruit via a delivery app. Yet on the second weekend, an acquaintance accidentally sent me a photo of Fuck's family eating hot pot at a restaurant. In the photo, Fuck was smiling brightly, his arm around his wife's shoulder. Cuban was sitting in the middle of the table with a paper hat on his head. His caption was about the whole family going out to relieve stress after Cuban's few days of illness. I stared at that photo for a long time. Lan Ann was in the hospital, still in pain, still running a fever. My mother-in-law stayed up all night, every night, changing cold compresses for her daughter, and my younger brother was out blowing off steam because his child had a mild fever for a few days. I didn't know whether to laugh or get angry. I just felt something silently shatter inside me. One evening near the end of the month, Lan Ann suddenly spiked a fever again. Her body was burning hot, her lips were chapped, and sweat beaded on her forehead. Mrs. Thuan frantically called for a nurse, then sat by the bed, wiping her daughter down bit by bit. I wanted to stay, but right then, the sales manager called to report that the partner was demanding a penalty for the late shipment. If it wasn't handled overnight, they would send a formal notice tomorrow morning. I took the phone to the end of the hallway, trying to keep my voice calm to discuss it, but my eyes kept drifting toward the ward. Through the glass door, I saw Mrs. Thuan leaning over to change the cloth for Lan Ann. Her hands were shaking, yet her movements remained gentle. Lan Ann was so exhausted she couldn't open her eyes, only occasionally knitting her brows in pain. I stood at the end of the hall, listening to the person on the other end talk about contracts, fines, terms, and responsibilities, but my mind was stuck on one question. Why is it my mother-in-law by my wife's side right now, and not my own mother? Why is the one who has to treat my wife like a daughter the very person who gave birth to her, while my own family acts like none of this concerns them? I hung up, leaned against the wall, and tears suddenly spilled out. I wasn't crying because I was tired. I was crying because I was ashamed. Ashamed for my wife, for my parents-in-law, and for myself. I had let Lan Ann suffer for too long under the guise of being one family, when in reality only she gave, while my family was used to taking. That night, after Lan Ann's fever broke, I sat alone on the waiting bench in the hallway. I opened my phone and started going through every old message, every call, every transfer to Fuck, to my mother, for all those times we called temporary help. I recorded everything in a separate file, not to calculate every cent with my relatives, but to force myself to look the truth in the face. Some debts aren't in money, but in a patience so enduring that others mistake it for an obligation. And from that night on, I knew I could no longer live blindly as I had before. Exactly 1 month after being admitted, Lan Ann was finally discharged by the doctor to continue monitoring at home. As she stepped out of the hospital gate, it was obvious how much weight she had lost. Her oversized coat looked practically a size too big, her face was pale, and her lips were still colorless from the medication. Even just from the ward door to the parking lot, she had to hold onto my arm lightly to stay steady. Mrs. Thuan walked behind, carrying a large bag of medicine in one hand and her follow-up appointment book and the doctor's instructions in the other. As we walked, she reminded me, the white pills are after breakfast, the antibiotics must be on time. If she gets a fever again at night, call the doctor immediately, don't be careless. I nodded repeatedly, listening to every word while feeling both love and guilt in my heart. For the past month, my mother-in-law has almost taken over all the care for Lan Ann for me. When the car reached the apartment complex, it was almost noon, and I helped Lan Ann slowly climb each step to the lobby. As soon as we opened the apartment door, the smell of hospital antiseptic seemed to still cling to her clothes. Lan Ann sighed wearily, sat down on the sofa, and instinctively clutched her stomach because the incision was still painful. I hadn't even had a chance to get water when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I paused slightly when I saw my mother standing outside with Fuck. That was the first time in the month Lan Ann had been hospitalized that my mother had come to our apartment. To be honest, in my heart at that moment, I still held a very small glimmer of hope. I thought maybe she felt guilty and came to visit her daughter-in-law, better late than never. But as soon as she entered the house, my mother just glanced at Lan Ann and blurted out, "Good that you're back." Women are fine after a few days of rest following surgery anyway. Lan Ann, who was holding a glass of water, froze slightly. Her face didn't change, but her hand gripping the glass tightened, while Mrs. Thuan behind me went completely silent. I turned to look and saw that her expression had grown noticeably cold. The atmosphere in the living room hadn't even settled before my mother sat down, adjusted her bag, and spoke up immediately. Kwan, I intend to discuss Fuck's matter with you. I blinked for a few seconds. What matter, Mom? Fuck, sitting nearby, immediately bowed his head as if embarrassed, but his hand was still holding his phone, which showed a picture of a white car. He held the screen toward me and said in a soft voice, I'm thinking of trading in my old car, brother. I hadn't even grasped what was going on when my mother continued right away. I think it looks pathetic for him to be driving that old car while he's trying to do business now. If partners take one look and look down on him, who would want to cooperate? I stood frozen in the middle of the living room. Lan Ann had just been discharged, a bandage still on her hand from the IV, medicine bags on the table, and checkup papers still out. Yet my mother didn't come to ask if her daughter-in-law was in pain, if she had eaten, or if she was sleeping well. The first thing on her mind was changing Fuck's car. My mother paid no attention to anyone's expression. She continued to ramble on incessantly. Look, in this day and age, people judge each other by their car first. If he drives such a piece of junk, what client would trust that he has money to do business? I think just by getting a nicer car, his work will turn around immediately. Fuck immediately chimed in. I'm looking at this car, it's used so it's cheap. They're letting it go for 70 million. I laughed bitterly, calling 70 million cheap. Fuck scratched his head. I was thinking of borrowing from you guys first. I'll pay you back later when things are stable. Hearing the words, pay back, my mind flashed to dozens of previous times. The time he opened a cafe, the time he imported goods online, the rent payments, and paying off his wife's credit card debt. Every single time it was, I'll pay you back later, but Fuck's later never came. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Thuan gently placed the bag of medicine on the table. She looked straight at my mother and asked very quietly, Ms. Han, do you know how many days your daughter-in-law was in the hospital? The whole room went silent. My mother looked slightly embarrassed but just seconds later retorted, of course I know. But she's home now, isn't she? Now that the life or death part is over, we have to worry about business, don't we? Hearing that, the blood rushed to my head. For an entire month that Lan Ann was hospitalized, my mother never once visited her daughter-in-law. During that month, Mrs. Thuan stayed up all night caring for her daughter. Mr. Niem quietly brought meals to the hospital. As for my mother, she was busy looking after her grandchildren and worrying about Fuck's business. And yet today, the moment she saw us walk in, the first thing she did was ask for money to buy a car. Lan Ann remained silent from the start. She bowed her head looking at her hands, her lips pale, and her face looked so tired it broke my heart. Just then, Fuck interjected again. Big brother, to be honest, I'm under a lot of pressure too. People judge based on appearances these days. If you drive an old car, clients look down on you. I snapped my head toward him. And your sister-in-law has been in the hospital for a month. Have you even visited her once? Fuck choked for a few seconds, then gave a forced laugh. Well, I've been busy with my little kid. Your kid had a mild fever for 2 days, yet your whole family kept posting pictures of yourselves dining out. Do you think I don't know? The atmosphere in the room immediately grew tense. My mother frowned. What kind of way is that to speak, Kwan? He's truly struggling. I looked at my mother. For the first time in my life, I felt such a distance between us. Then, I let out a laugh so cold that even I found it strange. I looked straight at my mother and asked, word for word, don't you feel ashamed saying those things? The whole room went dead silent. Fuck turned pale and looked at me. My mother stood stunned, as if she couldn't believe those words had come from the son who had always been so patient with her, all these years. After that sentence, the living room felt as if all the air had been sucked out of it. The ticking of the wall clock rang out in dry, rhythmic beats. It sounded strangely clear. My mother stared at me, her eyes wide, her face shifting from shock to flushed red. She probably never thought there would come a day I would dare to look her in the eye and say something so harsh. A few seconds later, she slammed her handbag onto the table. The metal clasp hit the glass surface with a sharp click that made Lan Ann flinch. My mother stood up abruptly, her voice trembling with anger. Are you being insolent to your mother, Kwan? Did you forget your own mother the moment you got married? Quote. I looked at my mother, feeling none of the usual weakness in my heart. If this were before, the moment she raised her voice like that, I would have backed down and said something to smooth things over just to keep the peace. But today is different. After a month of watching my wife in a hospital bed, and a month of witnessing my mother-in-law feeding her spoonfuls of porridge and giving her medication, I cannot keep pretending that everything is normal. I said slowly, my wife was in the hospital for a month, and you didn't even step in to see her once. She just got home today, and mother already asked for 70 million for fuck to buy a bike. Do you really think that's normal, mother? My mother froze, but only for a moment. She immediately tilted her chin up. So what if I don't go to the hospital? I'm old, what could I even do there? Besides, I still have to look after the kid. You're her husband, it's only right that you take care of your wife. Now that your younger brother is struggling, would it kill you to help him out a little? Quote, fuck, sitting nearby, wouldn't stay quiet either. He sat up, his voice filled with resentment. That's easy for you to say, isn't it? Without my 10 million back then, would you even be where you are today? Now that you have a big house and a successful company, you turn around and treat me like a beggar? Quote, as soon as he said that, Lan Ann, leaning back in her chair, let out a very soft laugh. The laugh was weak and raspy, but it was so chilling that even I was startled. Her lips were still pale from the medication, and her forehead was still beaded with sweat, yet, the way she looked at fuck was heartbreakingly calm. She said, it's been 10 years, and your family is still living off that exact same line? Fuck's face turned bright red. He jumped up and pointed his finger at Lan Ann. Don't think that just because you make money, you can look down on others. That company isn't just your doing. My brother makes money too. My brother has a share in this house as well. Quote, just as I was about to yell, Mrs. Thuan stepped forward. She stood between fuck and Lan Ann. Though small in stature, her voice was firm. She just had surgery. Show some humanity. If you want to fight over money, wait until she's recovered. Don't stand there and scream in front of a patient. Quote, my mother immediately spun around to face Mrs. Thuan. Her voice turned sharp and bitter. That sounds very nice coming from you. What is wrong with my son helping out his own brother? What do outsiders know about my family's business to interfere? Quote, Mrs. Thuan remained silent, but her gaze turned cold. As for Mr. Niem, who had been sitting on the edge of his seat without a word, he suddenly slammed his teacup down on the table, and the liquid in the cup sloshed out a little. He looked straight at my mother, his voice low. If this is your family's business, then don't drag my daughter's money into it. Lan Ann married your son. She didn't sign a contract to support his whole family. That statement hit my mother like a slap to the face. Her face turned purple, her lips trembling, but she still tried to crane her neck. How can you people say things like that? If fuck hadn't given the two of them 10 million back then to start their business, who knows if your daughter would be sitting in this house today? You have to remember who planted the tree when you eat the fruit. Hearing that, the feeling in my heart was no longer anger, but absolute exhaustion. 10 million, a debt we paid back a long time ago, with money, gifts, hard work, and by countless times cleaning up fuck's messes. Yet, in my mother's mouth, it remains a merit great enough to negate all the years Lan Ann and I spent sleepless nights, borrowing money, hustling, and building the company brick by brick. I looked at my mother and asked quietly, so, Mom, how much longer must we pay back those 10 million before it's enough? My mother looked momentarily flustered. Seeing that, fuck chimed in, don't talk like that. I'm not collecting a debt. I just want you to remember that you once owed me. Quote. Lan Ann closed her eyes, her voice tired but every word clear. Being indebted doesn't mean letting others trample all over your life. Fuck gritted his teeth to retort, but his phone suddenly started vibrating incessantly. The screen lit up in the tense room. He looked down, and his expression changed instantly. He had been so aggressive just a moment ago, but in a second, his face went pale, and he hurriedly declined the call. I noticed clearly that the screen showed the name Loan Shark, with dozens of missed calls below it. The phone hadn't even been silent for 3 seconds before it vibrated again. Fuck clumsily shoved the phone into his pocket, but the buzzing sound was still loud and persistent. My mother caught a glimpse of it, and her face stiffened for a moment. Even though she tried to hide it, I still recognized the panic in her eyes. I looked straight at Fuck. Who do you owe money to? Fuck startled, immediately snapping back, it's none of your business. I stepped closer. It's none of my business, yet you need 70 million that urgently? It's none of my business, yet people are calling you like they're coming for your life? Fuck took half a step back, his throat moving constantly, his hands shaking so hard he couldn't hide it. My mother hurriedly stepped between the two of us, her voice trying to sound firm. If he said it's none of your business, why do you keep asking? His business affairs, he can handle himself. I looked at my mother and then at my brother, and everything suddenly became terrifyingly clear. The 70 million for the car was just a cover. That pretense of looking professional to meet partners was just an excuse made up to squeeze more money out of me. I spoke slowly. Mom and Fuck are hiding something from me, aren't you? No one answered. The room was deathly silent, save for the phone in Fuck's pocket ringing repeatedly like an alarm signaling a looming disaster. And at that very moment, I understood that the situation in my family went far beyond mere greed or favoritism. Behind those 70 million, there was surely a much deeper, dirtier, and more dangerous pit. That night, after my mother and Fuck left, the apartment became heavily silent. Lan Ann fell asleep after taking her medicine, her breath shallow and weak, occasionally knitting her brows from the lingering pain of the surgery. Mrs. Thuan sat beside her daughter for a long while, only rising to go to the living room once she saw she was in a deep sleep. She looked at me without a word of reproach, but that gaze made my heart feel heavy as lead. I took my parents-in-law downstairs, telling them to go home and get some rest. Before stepping into the elevator, Mr. Niem simply said, "Kwan, regarding your family business, it's not my place to interfere, but if you keep letting Lan Ann be dragged into those dirty matters, you will truly lose her." As the elevator door closed, his words still echoed in my mind, cold and sharp as a knife. Back in the apartment, I couldn't sleep. Lan Ann was in the bedroom, while I sat alone in my study, pulling up the footage from the apartment door and the lobby cameras. I only intended to check if my mother and Fuck had made a scene in the hallway earlier, but when I rewound to around 4 p.m., my hand suddenly froze. Down in the lobby, two strange men were standing near the planters. One wore a black jacket with a visible tattoo on his wrist, and the other wore a cap pulled low. They didn't look like residents here. Those two stood there for a long time, occasionally looking up at the building and then back at their phones. Just as my car pulled into the basement, the guy wearing a hat immediately raised his phone to take a picture of my license plate. I replayed that clip several times, and a chill ran down my spine. These people weren't lost, nor were they regular visitors. They were tailing me, and if they took a picture of my license plate, it meant Fuck's situation wasn't just about needing 70 million for a bike as he claimed. I picked up my phone to call Fuck right away, but stopped myself. If he was already trying to hide it, asking him directly would only lead to more evasive answers. I dialed an old acquaintance named Dung who works in bank credit appraisal. My company once took out a loan with them to expand our warehouse. Dung was the one who handled the paperwork, so we were quite close. On the other end of the line, hearing my unusual tone, Dung asked immediately, "Is something wrong, Kwan?" I lowered my voice. "Could you help me check something privately? Have there been any recent loans linked to my wife's name? I've noticed some suspicious signs." Dung was silent for a few seconds then said, "This is sensitive, but if you suspect her personal information was used for a loan, I'll check it under a risk alert. Send me Lan An's ID number." 30 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Just seeing Dung's name on the screen made my heart pound. Dung's voice turned very serious. "Kwan, stay calm and listen to me. There are two unsecured loans in the system under Lan An's name. One for 280 million, one for 300 million, totaling nearly 600 million. The files were just disbursed not long ago." I jumped up from my chair. "That's impossible. Lan Ann has been in the hospital for a month. She hasn't signed anything." "Then it's highly likely the files were forged or she was impersonated. The files include a copy of her ID, income verification, and an emergency contact number." "Whose number is the emergency contact?" Dung slowly read out a string of digits. As soon as I heard the last 3 digits, my head started buzzing. That was my mother's number. I hung up, rushed straight into the spare bedroom, and opened the cabinet drawer where Lan Ann usually kept her personal documents. The plastic folder for documents is still there, but the photocopied ID and several income statements have disappeared. I remembered that a few months ago, Lan Ann had photocopied her documents for insurance procedures and left them in the house. I didn't pay attention back then. Who would have thought that oversight would become a knife pointed at her? I slammed the drawer shut, my hands trembling with anger. I immediately called my mother. My mother answered the phone, her voice trying to sound normal. "It's late, why are you calling?" I asked her straight. "Did you take Lan An's documents to get a loan for Fuck?" The other end of the line went completely silent. I gritted my teeth. "Answer me, Mom." My mother started beating around the bush. "What would I know about your wife's documents? She probably misplaced them somewhere." "Mom, don't lie to me. Your phone number is in the loan file. 2 loans totaling nearly 600 million are under Lan An's name. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Now my mother's voice started to panic, saying she only took the photocopies. Fuck said he needed to prove their relationship and just borrow his sister-in-law's name for a bit. He said he'd pay it back as soon as he got the money. It's not like anyone lost anything. I nearly roared at her. Do you know that forging loan documents is illegal? Do you know Lan Ann just had surgery and can barely stand, yet you turned her into a debtor for nearly 600 million? My mother raised her voice back as if she were cornered and had to win the argument. Why are you yelling at your mother? Sooner or later, your wife's money is this family's money anyway. It's just helping her brother a little, no need to act like it's the end of the world. I went numb. There are some things you hear that make you never want to argue again. Not because you accept it, but because it's too horrifying. In my mother's mind, Lan Ann's money, documents, honor, and safety could all be used as collateral for her youngest son. As long as fuck needs it, every boundary can be erased. I asked, my voice dropping low, how much does fuck owe? My mother was silent. Tell me the truth, who are those two men standing outside the apartment this afternoon? This time, my mother's breathing on the other end became rapid. After a long moment, she finally mumbled, he just happened to borrow a little, and with interest compounding, it became a huge amount. If he doesn't pay it back in time, they won't leave him alone. I closed my eyes. It was all clear now. There was no car being bought for business, and no partner complained about the old car. It was all just a show. Fuck is being hunted down by loan sharks. And my mother used my wife's name to borrow more money to fill the hole he dug himself. I recall that throughout the month Lan Ann was in the hospital, my mother kept asking if the company was okay, if contracts were cancelled, if payments were collected. Back then, I thought she was worried about her son. Now I understand. She was just afraid our cash flow would waver before she could scrape together enough to save fuck. After hanging up, I stood for a long time in the dark. The bedroom door was ajar. Lan Ann was still asleep. Her face, gaunt after the surgery, was bathed in the pale yellow light of the bedside lamp. I walked over to pull the blanket up for my wife. Seeing the bruises from the IV on her hand made my heart go cold. If I hadn't checked the cameras tonight, if I hadn't called dung, perhaps Lan Ann would have become a debtor of nearly 600 million without knowing it. And the person who pushed her into that was none other than my own mother. The next morning, I arrived at the company having barely slept. Lan Ann was still weak. I told her to stay home and rest, not to answer unknown calls, and not to open the door for anyone. I told her the company had an important meeting, but in reality, my heart was heavy because of what I discovered last night. 2 loans totaling nearly 600 million in my wife's name felt like a stone crushing my chest, making every breath feel choked. The meeting started at 9 o'clock. The partners sat across from me. On the table lay the contract that the whole company had been pursuing for over half a year. I tried to focus on each clause, trying to keep a calm face as if nothing had happened. But every few minutes, I would glance down at my phone, fearing that a bad call might come through. And just as the sales manager was presenting the delivery schedule, the meeting room door flew open, and the receptionist stood outside, deathly pale. Mr. Kwan, there are people in the lobby causing a scene. They say they must see you right now. I stood up, apologized to my partner, and stepped out quickly. As soon as I reached the lobby, I saw 3 men blocking the front desk. One wore a tight black t-shirt, his arms covered in tattoos down to his wrists. Another wore a thick gold chain, chewing gum, his eyes darting around as if my entire company was empty. The third man was shorter but had a cold gaze, holding a stack of crumpled papers in his hand. The staff stood cleared to both sides, no one daring to speak up. The front desk, which was always neat and bright, suddenly looked like a place that had just been hit by a storm. Papers were scattered, and the vase was tilted to one side. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice low. Who are you looking for? The guy holding the papers slammed them hard onto the counter. The sound rang out dry and sharp. Looking for fuck. He used your company's name to promise repayment. Now that he's run off, you need to settle this. I looked at the papers on the table, which included a few handwritten pledges. There were photos of fuck's ID and, more alarmingly, photos of my company business card. At the bottom of one page, there was a scrawled line. My brother is the company owner. If I don't pay, he will cover it. My blood seemed to freeze in my veins. I asked slowly, who gave him the right to drag my company into this? The guy with the gold chain smirked. You'll have to ask your brother that. We only know he said you were about to sell the company to pay off his debts. He even said you were very rich. A few $100 million is just pocket change to you. Whispers began to ripple from the direction of the staff. I felt everyone's eyes fixed on me. It wasn't malicious curiosity, but bewilderment. A company in the middle of a meeting with partners. Suddenly, debt collectors show up in the lobby demanding money from the director's brother. The company's reputation was being trampled in broad daylight. Just then, hurried footsteps echoed from outside the glass doors. Fuck rushed in, his hair matted with sweat, his shirt wrinkled, his face deathly pale. Seeing the three men, he stopped dead, but immediately ran over and grabbed my arm. "Brother, please save me just this one time. I beg you, it really is the last time." I shoved his hand away. "You took your sister-in-law's documents to borrow money while she was hospitalized, and now you have the nerve to come here begging for my help." Fuck trembled, glancing around at the many employees watching, his lips quivering. "Don't talk about it here." I gave a cold laugh. "Do you know what shame is? When you use my company's name as a guarantee, when you turned my wife into a debtor, did you feel any shame then?" The tattooed man heard this and burst into laughter. He crossed his arms, his voice drawling with sarcasm. "Oh, so you don't know the whole story? Your brother even said this company would eventually have his share in it too. He said he put up the capital for your business back then, so now you have to pay him back." I snapped my head toward Fuck. He hung his head low, his shoulders hunched. In that single second, all his justifications became pointless. He didn't just owe money. He was going around peddling that 10 million favor from years ago like a deed to my life. Suddenly, Fuck collapsed in the middle of the office lobby. His knees hit the stone floor with a heavy thud. He grabbed my legs, sobbing like a child. "Brother, I was wrong. A friend lured me into crypto, and at first, I actually made a profit. I got greedy and borrowed more, then lost it all and started betting to win it back. I didn't mean to, brother. I just wanted to earn money so my wife and child wouldn't suffer." I looked at him, my heart no longer able to distinguish between love and anger. His "I didn't mean to" sounded so light and hollow. Meanwhile, the consequences weigh on my wife and me like a mountain. Fuck continued to cry. "If there's no money today, they will come to my house. They said they would make my wife and child pay. Cuban is still so young, please save me, brother. You can hate me, but your nephew is innocent." Before I could answer, there was more noise outside the door. My mother ran into the office, her hair disheveled, her face covered in tears. As soon as she saw me, she rushed over and clutched my legs right in front of all the staff. "Kwan, save your brother. If he dies, I will die too." I stood frozen. The entire office lobby fell deathly silent. Several female employees covered their mouths, some turning away as they couldn't bear to watch. My business partner had also emerged from the meeting room, standing in the distance with a look of astonishment. My mother looked up, her hand still clutching my trousers, crying until she was hoarse. "You're so rich, how can you grudge 600 million to your own brother? With such a big company, houses, and cars, how can you bear to see him pushed to the edge?" I looked at my mother kneeling on the company floor. In the past, just seeing her cry would have softened my heart. But then, the image of Lan Ann lying in the hospital bed flashed through my mind, her hand bruised from IV needles, her name used by my own mother and brother in a loan application. I bent down to peel my mother's fingers off my trousers one by one. My voice was hoarse, but I clearly said, "Mother, get up. This is my company, not a stage for you to pressure me with tears." My mother went silent. As for me, for the first time in my life, I looked at her without pity, feeling only a sense of humiliation and despair flowing back into my heart. I thought that just by getting my mother and Fuck out of the office, everything would stop for the day. But I was wrong. In this day and age, an incident in the lobby, even for a few minutes, can spread faster than fire through dry straw. An employee had recorded my mother kneeling and begging me to save Fuck, then sent it to the internal chat group with the message: "The boss's family situation is intense, everyone stay away from the lobby." That clip was meant to stay in a private group, but someone in the accounting department, whether by accident or on purpose, mistakenly sent it to the group including Lan Ann. At that moment, my wife was resting at home, her health still fragile, her phone right next to her pillow. She opened it, and within seconds, everything I had tried to hide to keep her at ease was laid bare before her eyes. In the clip, my mother was crying until she was hoarse, saying I was rich but grudged 600 million to my own brother. Fuck was kneeling on the floor, his hair disheveled, while 3 debt collectors stood beside him like shadows looming over the family's honor. It got even worse. My mother even shouted one thing very clearly. Your wife's money is also this family's money. Save your brother first. Lan Ann watched until that part, then fainted right on the sofa. The hourly cleaner had just entered to tidy up when she called me, panicked. When I answered the phone, I was sitting in my office, with a pile of Fuck's debt commitment papers in front of me. Her voice was trembling uncontrollably. Mr. Kwan, Ms. Lan Ann has fainted. I keep calling her, but she won't wake up. I rushed home like a madman. Throughout the journey, the sounds of horns, screeching brakes, and people yelling behind me all became distant. In my head, only Lan An's pale face when she was just discharged from the hospital appeared. I had promised to let her rest, and not let my family's dirty business touch her again. Yet, not even a day later, I let her be dragged back into that nightmare. When I got home, Lan Ann was lying on her side on the sofa. Her face was deathly pale, hands clutching her stomach, breathing weakly. I carried her out to the car and took her straight to the hospital. Mrs. Thuan received the news and rushed over as well. Her face turned pale with fear. She didn't scold me, but the way she looked at me then felt heavier than any reproach. After examining her, the doctor had a very stern expression. He said Lan An's health after surgery was still weak, the internal wounds hadn't fully healed, and she must absolutely avoid strong agitation. If the abdominal pain and low blood pressure recur, she will have to be hospitalized for observation again. I sat in the hospital hallway, holding my head in my hands. Just yesterday, I had brought my wife out of this place, thinking that she could finally lie in her familiar bed at home, eat a proper meal, and sleep without being disturbed by hospital machine noises. Yet today, I was the one who brought her back to this place filled with the smell of antiseptic and fear. While I was at the hospital, Mrs. Thuan said she would go home to get more clothes and medicine for Lan Ann. I gave her the keys, asking her to help grab some loose-fitting clothes, extra soft towels, and the medication tracking notebook. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Thuan. Her voice was very low, but I could clearly hear the suppressed anger. Kwan, can you come home right now? My heart sank. What's wrong, Mom? Lan An's jewelry box has been pried open. Her wedding ring is no longer in there. I jumped up from my chair. That ring was the gift I gave Lan Ann for our 5th wedding anniversary. It wasn't just because it was expensive, but because I bought it with the first profits after the company finally stood on its own feet for years. When I put it on my wife's finger, I said that last year I owed her a proper wedding. Today I repaid her with a promise that I would never let her feel neglected again. Yet now, that ring has vanished. I immediately opened my phone to check the house cameras. The recording from the previous afternoon appeared very clearly. When I took Lan Ann to the resting room, my mother made an excuse to use the restroom. But instead of going to the bathroom, she snuck into our bedroom. She opened the drawer, rummaged through the jewelry box, grabbed the ring, put it in her pocket, and quickly walked out. I looked at the screen, my hands ice cold. I called my mother right away. She answered, her voice sounding weary. What is it now? I asked directly, where is Lan An's wedding ring? My mother was silent for a few seconds then replied, how would I know about your wife's ring? I gritted my teeth, I have the camera footage. The other end went silent, and I immediately sent her the video. Less than a minute later, my mother called back. This time her voice cracked, not out of regret, but because she had been caught red-handed. I only pawned it temporarily. Fuck is being hunted down by people. I pawned it for 120 million so he could pay off the high-interest debt. When I have money, I'll redeem it. I shouted right in the middle of the hospital hallway. That is my wife's wedding ring. My mother also yelled over the phone, a ring versus your brother's life. Which one is more important? Are you still his brother? I stood frozen. Mrs. Thuan had been standing beside me the whole time, still holding Lan An's bag of clothes. Her face was pale with anger, her voice trembling with every word. My daughter got married, she didn't sell herself to this family. Mr. Niem had also just arrived at the hospital. After hearing everything, he stood still for a few seconds before suddenly slamming his fist against the hallway wall. The sound echoed, making people sitting nearby jump and turn around. His hand turned red, but he didn't seem to feel any pain. The eyes of this man, who had been composed his entire life, were bloodshot. He looked at me, his voice hoarse. Kwan, I'll ask you one thing. Can you still protect your wife? I hung my head, unable to answer, because in that moment, I realized I had failed not only as a son but also as a husband. 3 days later, when Lan Ann was a bit better and the doctor allowed her to continue her recovery at home, our apartment was once again restless. That morning, I had just finished fixing a warm glass of water for my wife's medicine when the doorbell rang incessantly. Through the camera screen, I saw my mother standing outside, followed by several relatives from my father's side. Everyone had a stern expression on their face, as if they had come to put me on trial. I opened the door, and my mother walked in first, her eyes puffy. As soon as she saw me, she spoke up. Today she invited everyone here to settle this, as she could not let people say her son had become rich and turned his back on his own blood. I looked at her, then at the faces behind her. Some looked sympathetic, some annoyed, and some sighed as soon as they sat down, as if I were truly a disobedient son. Lan Ann was lying in the room, and I didn't want her to hear those bitter words. I pulled the bedroom door shut, leaving it slightly ajar, and returned to the living room. My mother sat down in the middle of the sofa, dabbing her tears with a tissue. Quote, "Everyone, look, I raised him to be this big. Back when we were poor, I sacrificed everything so he could get an education. Now that he runs a company and lives in a big house, his own brother is in trouble, and he just stands by and watches." An uncle frowned at me. "Quan, to be honest, even strangers help each other in times of trouble, let alone brothers. Since you have the means, give your brother a hand. He'll pay you back once he gets back on his feet." Another aunt added, "That's right, your mother called me and cried all night. She said fuck once gave you and your wife 10 million when you started your business, so now that he's in trouble, how can you just turn your back on him?" I listened to it all in silence. Not because I had no defense, but because I wanted to let everyone exhaust everything they heard from my mother. Seeing that I didn't respond, my mother felt even more emboldened. Her voice choked up. "I don't need him to show any filial piety to me. I only asked him to save his brother once, yet he has the heart to say he won't pay another penny from now on. Can you believe there's a child like that?" I stood up and went into my study to get my laptop. When I set the computer on the table, the living room fell slightly quiet. I had already opened a file I prepared several days ago. On the screen was the entire list of bank transfers from the past 10 years. Each line clearly recorded the date, the reason, and the amount. I turned the screen toward everyone. If you all want to talk about favors and debt, then today we'll talk about them fully. I scrolled down through each item. The money to repay Fuck's 10 million from back then, along with a phone worth over 12 million. Rent for Fuck's family for 3 years, debt for his failed coffee shop, money for online stock that went to zero, childbirth costs for Cuban, preschool tuition, medical bills, and the money my mother asked for whenever she said Fuck was desperate. Each figure appeared clear and cold, impossible to deny. The atmosphere in the room gradually changed. Those who had just been criticizing me began to lean in to look closer. One aunt muttered, "How is it this much?" I scrolled to the final line, a total of over 4 billion dong. The whole room went deathly silent. I looked at each person, my voice low but clear. If I'm ungrateful, then did this 4 billion just blow in with the wind? If I turned my back on my brother, then who has been paying his debts for the last 10 years? Who has been feeding his family every time he failed? Who let my wife go without so many things just to keep peace for the family? My mother turned pale but still tried to say that siblings should help each other. Quote, "You're successful now, so why keep count of helping your brother a little?" I looked at her for a long time. My mother's "a little" is over 4 billion. My mother's "a little" also includes Lan On's documents being taken to borrow nearly 600 million. All mom could come up with was that my wife's wedding ring was secretly pawned by her. Having said that, I opened the home security footage. On the screen, my mother's every move was clear. Sneaking into the bedroom, opening the jewelry box, and slipping Lan On's wedding ring into her pocket. When the video ended, no one could say a word. An aunt in the family stood up abruptly and pointed right at my mother. "Ms. Han, how could you do such a thing? You even took your own daughter-in-law's wedding ring." My mother trembled, her lips quivering. I only pawned it temporarily to save Fuck." Fuck, who had been huddled in the corner of the sofa, suddenly jumped up, his face beat red as everything was exposed. He pointed at my mother, his voice cracking. "It was Mom who told me to borrow it. Mom said to just use Lan On's name. Quan is so rich, he won't just ignore it. Mom said if I told the truth, he wouldn't give me the money, so just do it first and figure it out later." My mother stood there, stunned. She looked at Fuck as if she couldn't believe this was the youngest son she had defended her whole life. Quote, "Fuck, what are you saying? I did everything for you." Fuck avoided her gaze, lowered his head, and remained silent. In that very moment, I saw my mother suddenly age, not because I exposed her, but because the child she loved most pushed all the blame onto her. Just then, the bedroom door opened. Lan Ann stepped out slowly, a bandage still on her hand from the IV drip. Her face was pale, but her eyes were strangely calm. I hurriedly stood up to help my wife, but she gently shook her head. In Lannon's hand was a neatly folded piece of paper. She placed the paper on the table. Her voice was very soft, but every word fell like a knife cutting into my heart. Quote, I can't take this family anymore. Kwan, I need to separate for a while. I was paralyzed as I stared at the two words at the top of the paper. Every sound around me seemed to vanish. I had thought I was dealing with mom and fuck's issues, but at that moment, I realized the one who was most deeply hurt was Lannan. She didn't need me to win this argument. She had needed to be protected for a long time. I turned to look at my mother. For the first time in my life, I gave a cold smile to the very woman who gave birth to me. From today on, mom and fuck will have to live on your own. I am not paying another penny. Any loan in Lannon's name, I will work out with the lawyers and the bank. Whoever made the mistake must bear the consequences. My mother panicked and rushed forward to grab my hand. Kwan, you can't do this to your mother. I took a step back. She froze in the middle of the living room, her hand grasping at thin air. And for the first time, my mother understood that the son she always manipulated with tears had truly let go. I thought after that day of being exposed before our relatives, my mother would know when to stop. At the very least, she should have understood that things had gone beyond a mere family argument. But I had underestimated her stubbornness. Just 2 days later, when I had just arrived at the office to handle the debt files under Lannon's name, the receptionist called my office in a hushed voice. Mr. Kwan, your mother and some relatives are in the lobby. They say they need to see you right now. I walked down to the lobby, and as soon as I stepped out of the elevator, I heard my mother's voice ringing out clearly. Look at you all, he has such a big, beautiful company and employees coming and going like a festival. Yet when his own brother is in trouble, he claims he has no money. I raised him to be a man, and now that he has a wife, he treats his mother like a stranger. The relatives stood around her, some with arms crossed, some shaking their heads, others deliberately looking at my staff as if to turn our family business into a public trial. I saw a few employees standing far away, afraid to approach, but their eyes were full of confusion. After the debt collectors came last time, the company had only just settled down. Yet today, my own mother was the one pouring gasoline on the fire. An uncle saw me and immediately pointed his finger. Kwan, let me ask you straight. Do you still consider your own kin to be blood? Your own brother is being cornered by gangsters. Your mother has cried her eyes out, yet you are still hoarding money for your wife. You have the money, but you'd let your brother die. Are you even human? I looked at him and then at my mother. She immediately brought a handkerchief to wipe her tears, her voice choking up. I'm not asking for anything for myself. I'm only begging him to save fuck. But now he's been egged on by his wife, saying whoever did wrong should take the blame. He talks about his own flesh and blood like a stranger. Before I could answer, a taxi screeched to a halt in front of the company, and the door swung open. Fuck's wife, Thou, stepped out, leading Cuban with one hand and pulling an old fabric bag with the other. Her eyes were red and swollen, as if she'd cried all night. Cuban clung tightly to his mother, his face pale with fear at the sight of the crowd. As soon as she saw my mother, Thou didn't greet her or show the usual courtesy. She blurted out, almost screaming, "How long do you intend to keep up this act, mother?" The entire company lobby fell silent instantly. My mother was stunned. Where did fuck come from? His face pale, he hurriedly grabbed his wife's arm. Quote, Thou, take the child home, this has nothing to do with you. Thou violently shook his hand off. Nothing to do with me? You used our child's photos to borrow money everywhere, and now you say it has nothing to do with me? She turned to look at me, tears streaming down her face, but her voice was crystal clear. Brother Kwan, I'm sorry, I can't stay silent anymore. If I stay quiet today, Cuban will end up being dragged into the mud with his father later. Fuck shouted, shut your mouth. Thou hugged Cuban tightly, looking at her husband with eyes full of both pain and contempt. Are you afraid I'll tell the truth? You haven't done any honest work for the past 2 years. You started with football betting, then played with crypto, lost it all, and then took out loan shark apps. You even took photos of our child and sent them to people, claiming our child was sick or needed tuition money just to beg for funds piece by piece. The relatives who had just been defending fuck began to look at each other. An aunt whispered, good heavens, is that really true? My mother snapped immediately, Thou, don't you dare make up stories to ruin your husband. Even if fuck is wrong, it's just because of the pressure to provide for his wife and child. You're a wife who doesn't know how to help, and now you're shaming him in front of everyone. Thou laughed through her tears. Providing for his wife and child, you say? Mother, do you even know what that 70 million used to buy the bike was actually for? She pulled her phone from her pocket, her hands trembling, but she tapped away quickly. That car wasn't for meeting a partner. He planned to buy it for Lee, who works at the karaoke bar on Ring Road. The whole lobby gasped. Fuck lunged to grab the phone, but I stepped in front of him. Quote, "Stay still." Thou played the recording, Fuck's voice sounding tinny but clear enough. "Once I buy a morning for Lee, she'll agree to live with me. My wife is so stupid, and my mom can take care of the money. Brother Quan has always loved mom. If she cries a few times, he'll give everything." The air in the lobby froze. My mother stood paralyzed, her face deathly pale. The uncle who was scolding me earlier hung his head, unable to say another word. Some female staff members covered their mouths. Little Ben was so scared he sobbed and clung tightly to his mother's shirt. Fuck could no longer control himself. He rushed over and grabbed Thou's wrist, growling, "Who told you to record me? Do you want me to die, huh?" I grabbed Fuck's shoulder and pulled him back hard. "If you lay a hand on your wife and child in front of me again, I'm calling the police immediately." He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. "You've got it good. You have money, a house, and a wife who defends you. But what about me? Everything I do is compared to you. Is it wrong for me to want a little dignity?" Thou burst into tears. "Your dignity is stealing your sister-in-law's medical funds, taking her documents for loans, and buying a car for your mistress." That statement was like a final blade cutting through the pathetic facade that Fuck always wore. I looked at my younger brother, for the first time no longer seeing him as the immature youngest child who needed support. Before me was a man over 30, selfish, deceitful, and so used to being shielded that he no longer knew shame. An aunt turned to my mother, her voice bitter. "Han, you've spoiled your youngest to this point. Do you see clearly now? You dragged us here to scold Quan. Turns out you wanted us to be shields for you and your son?" My mother staggered back, her lips trembling. She looked at Fuck, but he avoided her gaze. The child she treated as a treasure could only bow his head and hide behind others when in a crisis. I was just about to tell security to escort everyone out when the reception desk phone rang. The receptionist answered, and her expression changed instantly. She looked at me, voice trembling. "Mr. Quan, the sales manager says our rival just snatched our major contract. They have our full quote and our company's internal designs." I stood frozen in the lobby. The surrounding noise faded away, and a cold chill ran down my spine. Fuck's mess, it turns out, hadn't hit rock bottom yet. I couldn't stand in the lobby any longer. After the sales manager's call, I told security to move all the relatives to the large meeting room on the second floor. Not because I wanted to air family laundry, but because this was no longer just about mom favoring her youngest or my brother's debts. It was directly hitting the company, the livelihood of dozens of employees, and the hard work Lan Ann and I had built for over a decade. Hoy, the sales manager, walked into the meeting room, set his laptop on the table, looking grave. He looked at me and said quietly, "Mr. Quan, Ton Dat just submitted a quote exactly 2% lower than ours. Not only that, the perspective rendering they submitted is nearly identical to our internal draft, with only a few minor details changed." I asked who had access to those files. Hoy swallowed hard. "Only the board of directors, the design team, and senior sales staff. The final version hadn't even been sent out yet." The room fell completely silent. The relatives who had been defending my mother just moments ago started to realize this was no longer a simple matter. I looked over at Fuck. He was sitting in the corner, his face pale, avoiding my eyes. That one look alone was enough to make my heart sink. I was too familiar with that guilty look he gave after every trouble he caused. But this time, what he did wasn't just about owing money or telling lies. If my suspicions are correct, he has betrayed his own brother's company. I turned to Hoy and told him to pull up all the footage from the archives area over the last 2 months. Quote, "Look for any unauthorized access after hours." Hoy nodded and immediately called the internal security officer to bring up the data drive. While waiting, my mother couldn't sit still. She kept glancing at Fuck, then at me, her hands twisting a tissue until it was crumpled. I asked her, "Is there anything you want to say first?" She startled, immediately replying, "I don't know anything to say. Have I ever interfered with your company business?" About 10 minutes later, the camera footage was opened on the large screen. Hoy fast-forwarded quickly through the hours until he stopped at a clip near 10 p.m. Right during the week Lan Ann was still in the hospital. On screen, the back door opened, and the person who walked in was Fuck. He wore a cap and a mask, but his gait and that jacket were unmistakable. In his hand, he held an old access card. The kind of card I had lent him years ago when I asked him to help move some boxes. I heard a soft intake of breath in the room. Hoi fast-forwarded more. Fuck walked straight to the hallway of the document room. And then, what made my spine chill was the silhouette of my mother appearing at the back door. She stood in the hallway, looking around, occasionally holding the phone to her ear as if keeping watch for someone. Fuck was inside for nearly 15 minutes before coming out, his sleeve bulging as if hiding something inside. My mother hurried to lead him away via the stairwell. I stood for a long time, unable to say anything. My whole body felt like it was nailed to the screen. My mother panicked and waved her hands. I didn't know what he was doing. He said he left his things at your company. I only went with him so he wouldn't be questioned by security. I looked at her, my throat parched. You stood guard for him to enter the document room and you say you know nothing? She started crying immediately, the familiar kind of crying that I had softened my heart to countless times before. But today, that crying no longer shook me. I turned to Hoi to have him show the file copy history from the document room computer. Hoi worked for a few minutes then pointed at the screen. That night, an unknown USB was plugged into the secondary server. The accessed folders included quotes, drawings, supplier lists, and the final client proposals. Fuck suddenly stood up. Don't pin it all on me, I only took a few files. I didn't know they would use it to steal your contract. As soon as those words escaped, he realized he had slipped up. The whole room turned to stare at him. Thou hugged Cuban tightly, her tears falling uncontrollably. She muttered, "You're insane, Fuck. Did you really sell out your own brother?" I stepped in front of Fuck, my voice so low it chilled me to the bone. Who bought it? He pressed his lips together and didn't answer. I slammed a stack of papers onto the table. It was the bank statement the accountant just found through the transactions Fuck once bragged about in the family group chat. 3 days after the night he snuck into the company, an account belonging to a representative from Ton Dad transferred $300 million to him under the memo of market consulting payment. I pushed the statement toward Mom. Look at it, Mom. Was $300 million enough to pay off his loan shark interest? My mother burst into sobs, her shoulders shaking, but this time she didn't deny it. Her silence was all the answer I needed. I continued, each word cutting through my throat. You knew he had been selling company documents for a while, didn't you? My mother covered her face, her voice shattered. I didn't think he would actually sell them. He said he just borrowed the information so people could evaluate his business potential so they would lend him money. I was just afraid people would beat him, afraid he would be taken away. He is your brother, Quan. I laughed, but inside, I felt neither joy nor sorrow anymore. So you gave him the spare company key? My mother looked up at me, her panicked eyes revealing everything. After a long moment, she stammered that she took it from my drawer at home. I thought it would just be this one time. My vision went dark. Lan Ann is in the hospital fighting for her life, while my mother was rummaging through my drawer to give Fuck the spare key. My wife is in too much pain to sleep, while my brother sneaks into the office to copy files and sell them. Strangers stealing our contract isn't as terrifying as the first stab coming from your own family. Right at that moment, the meeting room door opened. Lan Ann was standing outside, hand lightly clutching the doorframe, not knowing how long she had been listening, only seeing her face deathly pale, her lips trembling, her eyes red but dry. I hurried over to steady my wife, but she just looked past my shoulder at my mother and Fuck. In a very soft voice, she asked, "While I was in the hospital, was this what you all were doing behind our backs?" No one answered. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails nearly dug into my skin. The pain in my palms could not compare to the pain in my chest. I turned back to look at my mother, the woman who once held me as a child, who taught me that siblings must love each other. But now, she is the one using the bond of blood to justify stabbing her eldest son and daughter-in-law in the back. I asked in a hoarse voice, "Mother, you save him by killing your eldest son, is that it?" My mother collapsed into a chair, the tissue falling from her hand, stark white against the tile floor. This time, no one among the relatives stepped forward to defend her. Even the uncle who just called me unfilial bowed his head in silence. Because all the evidence was too clear, and the truth was so ugly that no mention of blood ties could cover it up. That evening after leaving the company, Fuck disappeared. He didn't come home, didn't answer his phone, and didn't respond to any messages. Thou held Cuban in a corner of the meeting room, crying until she was inconsolable. Meanwhile, my mother was acting frantic, calling all of Fuck's friends and then distant relatives to see if anyone had seen him. But the more she called, the paler she grew. because no one knew where fuck was. I also called him many times. At first, it rang, but then it went straight to voicemail. By then, I realized fuck wasn't just hiding from the family. He was hiding from the people he had borrowed money from, made promises to, and perhaps even swindled. My mother slumped in her chair, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone, muttering, "Where could he have gone? He wouldn't dare, he's just too scared." No one replied to her. The silence in the meeting room at that moment was heavier than any accusation. I took Thou and Cuban to her parents' house for a while, telling her to turn off her phone, don't meet any strangers, wait for me. Because she had been so agitated all day, I took her back to the hospital for a follow-up exam that very night. She didn't say a word the whole way, just rested her head against the window, hands gently on her belly, her face so exhausted I didn't dare ask anything else. Around 11 p.m., just after the doctor finished checking her and told Lan Ann she needed complete bed rest, my phone buzzed incessantly. It was the building security. As soon as I picked up, chaotic noise erupted from the other end of the line. "Mr. Kwan, please come back immediately. A group of people showed up looking for you. They pounded on your apartment door and are causing a scene in the lobby. We can't stop them." My heart gave a jolt. How many people? About 6 or 7. Some are tattooed, some are carrying clubs. They said if fuck isn't here, his brother and sister-in-law will have to pay the debt. I gripped the phone tightly and looked at Lan Ann. She had heard everything, and her face went pale instantly. I wanted to tell her to stay at the hospital, but she grabbed my hand, her voice weak but firm. "I'm going with you. If they show up at our place, I can't just lie here and wait." I knew she was still very weak, but I also understood that leaving her alone while she was terrified would be even more dangerous. I called Mr. Niem immediately to briefly report the situation, then helped my wife to the car. During the whole drive back to the apartment, I drove while listening to my heart pounding in my chest. Lan Ann sat beside me, lips pressed tightly together, her hands gripping the seatbelt until her knuckles turned white. As the car turned into the apartment gate, I already saw a crowd gathered in front of the lobby. A section of the ground floor glass door had been smashed. The shards sparkled under the security lights. Neighbors were crowded on both sides, some terrified, others holding up phones to record. Vulgar and aggressive shouting echoed from inside the lobby. A tall man with a silver chain around his neck and a cigarette in his hand was standing in the middle of the entrance. As soon as he saw me get out of the car, he lunged forward and grabbed me by the collar. The smell of cigarettes and alcohol hit me right in the face. "Your brother sold us out. He ran off with the money. Are you paying, or are you going to let your wife pay?" I brushed his hand away, trying to steady my voice. "Fuck's debt is his own. You go find fuck. I didn't sign any loan papers, and my wife is even less involved." He laughed, turning his head to look at the guys behind him. "Did you hear that? Saying your own brother has nothing to do with it. So when he used your company's name to promise repayment, and when your mother begged for an extension, why didn't you say it had nothing to do with it?" I froze. It turned out my mother had met them, and even begged for more time for fuck. At this point, everything was a tangled mess of rotten rope. The more I tried to untie it, the filthier it got. Lan Ann stepped out of the car, one hand on the door, looking very pale. I rushed back to support her, but the man had already seen her. He sneered, "Oh, so this is the sister-in-law who signed for the loan. If you signed for it, you pay it, right?" With that, he stepped forward. I stood in front of Lan Ann, but in the chaos, another man shoved me hard from behind. Lan Ann stumbled, clutching her stomach, her face drained of color as she collapsed onto the floor. Her soft moan tore through my composure. In that split second, my patience snapped completely. I lunged forward and punched the guy who pushed my wife square in the face. He fell backward, blood from his nose dripping onto his shirt. The whole group immediately surged forward in a frenzy. The apartment security guard shouted loudly. Neighbors were in an uproar. The sound of broken glass crunched underfoot. I only had time to bend down to support Lan Ann, pulling her behind a stone pillar. Just as the situation was about to spiral out of control, a deep, fierce voice echoed from the lobby entrance. Quote, "Let's see which one of you dares to touch my daughter." I snapped my head around. Mr. Niem appeared with 3 sturdy-looking older men. I later learned they were his old friends from the police force, now retired, but their demeanor remained stern. Mr. Niem walked straight up to Lan Ann, shielding his daughter from the group. His face was chillingly cold. The ringleader jutted his chin out. Quote, "Old man, this money business doesn't concern you, so stay out of it." Mr. Niem pointed at him, his words hitting like nails into the floor. you're smashing doors, threatening residents, and assaulting someone who just had surgery. If you're so brave, stay right here and wait for the police to discuss your money." As he finished, police sirens wailed from outside the gate. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the lobby. The officers quickly stepped out. The group immediately huddled together. The leader spat his cigarette onto the floor and pointed at me. "If we don't have the money in 3 days, don't blame us. Your brother can hide, but you won't be able to." The police ordered the group to leave the area and filed a report for causing a disturbance. Even though they were gone, I still couldn't calm down. Lan Ann sat in the hallway chair, clutching her stomach with one hand, cold sweat pouring down her forehead. I carried her upstairs and called our regular doctor to examine her that very night. After the exam, the doctor said sternly, "The internal incision hasn't stabilized yet. The recent collision could cause prolonged pain. Any further impact could easily cause stitches to tear or internal bleeding." Hearing that, I felt a chill run through my entire body. Lan Ann lay on the bed, eyes shut tight from exhaustion, her breathing still trembling. I sat beside her holding my wife's hand. Her palms were ice cold. I didn't close my eyes that night. Outside in the living room, my mother called repeatedly, but I didn't answer. Every time the phone rang, I looked over at Lan Ann and felt my anger deepen a little more. This is no longer just about a few $100 million, or brothers helping each other, or my mother favoring the youngest. This has dragged my wife into it. Someone who just went through a dangerous surgery and came back from the brink. I looked at Lan Ann's gaunt face in the nightlight and told myself that if I am soft-hearted one more time, the person buried in the hole my family dug won't be Fuck or my mother, but my own wife. And this time, I must put an end to everything at the root. On the morning of the 3rd day after the chaos at the apartment, Lan Ann had to return to the hospital for another checkup. The doctor said the incision showed no signs of tearing, but her body was exhausted from constant stress, so she needed to stay for observation for another day to be sure. I sat by the hospital bed, watching my wife's face grow thinner in just a few days, and felt as if my heart was being torn apart. Since we got married, I have never seen Lan Ann so silent. Around 9 a.m., Thou called my phone. As soon as I answered, I heard her sobbing uncontrollably. Quote, "Quan, the police have caught Fuck. He was detained near the border crossing. They said he was trying to escape to the other side." I closed my eyes, my hand gripping the phone tightly. Although I had guessed Fuck would do something reckless, I didn't expect him to abandon his wife, children, and elderly mother, leaving behind all that dead just to run away alone. The news spread very quickly. Less than half an hour later, my mother appeared at the hospital. She ran down the hallway like a woman possessed, her hair disheveled, her shirt buttons misaligned. Seeing me standing in front of Lan Ann's room, she rushed over and, without a word, slapped me straight in the face. The slap echoed through the crowded hallway. Nearby patients' families startled and turned around. My cheek burned, but I didn't flinch, nor did I raise my hand to cover it. My mother stood before me, her eyes bloodshot, her voice hoarse from crying. "You've ruined your own brother. Even if he was wrong, he's still your brother. How could you bear to call the police on him?" I looked at her, my heart aching to the point of numbness. Quote, "Not yet reported to the police?" My mother screamed. "Are you still denying it? Who else but you knew about him selling company documents and his debts? You want him in prison to please your wife, right?" The hospital room door opened. Lan Ann stood inside, one hand on the doorframe, her face pale from the noise. Mrs. Thuan quickly steadied her daughter, while Mr. Niem stood up from the waiting chair, his eyes turning cold. I looked at my mother, my throat tightening. She still believes that I am the one who pushed Fuck to his breaking point, while from beginning to end, I was only trying to keep things from killing more innocent people. My mother cried while hitting my shoulder. "I have lost everything, Quan. The home is in shambles, and your brother is arrested. How do you expect me to live now? You are rich, you are capable, you have a wife and a company, while he only has his mother. Why couldn't you spare him just once?" Before I could answer, 2 men in plain clothes walked up from the end of the hallway. A middle-aged man held up his badge, his voice calm but clear. "May I ask who is Ms. Nguyen Thi Han?" My mother froze, her tear-filled eyes fixed on him. "That's me." The officer nodded and took a thin file folder out of his briefcase. "We need to verify a few more details in your report. At the same time, we would also like to invite Mr. Min Quan and Ms. Lan Ann to provide statements regarding the forged unsecured loan documents and the company data leak." The entire hallway went silent. I stood there, frozen. My mother was just as stunned, as if she had just heard something that had nothing to do with her. The officer opened the file, revealing a photocopy of the report with my mother's signature clearly visible at the bottom. Accompanying it was a sealed evidence bag and a phone intake record. He continued, Mrs. Han came to the police station early yesterday morning. She handed over a personal phone containing messages between Min Fuck and a loan shark ring, along with several recordings related to the sale of internal company documents. This was the initial basis for us to coordinate and intercept Fuck as he was preparing to leave the area. I looked at my mother, unable to believe my own ears. The woman who had just slapped me and screamed that I was harming my own brother turned out to be the very person who signed the report. She was the one who handed over the phone. She was the one who provided the evidence that allowed the police to track Fuck down. Mrs. Thuan, Mr. Niem, Lan An, and several nearby patients' families were all silent. The air in the hallway felt thick. My mother trembled and took a step back, her lips quivering, and tears welled up again. But this time, it wasn't the kind of crying used to manipulate others. It was the cry of someone who had just torn apart with her own hands what she had spent her life trying to protect. She looked at me, her voice breaking, Mom, I didn't want to lose another child. I couldn't say a word. My mother covered her face, her back completely hunched over. Quote, that night, I saw Lan An fall to the floor, clutching her stomach, her face turning pale with pain. I heard the doctor say that one more hard impact could be dangerous. That was when I got scared. I was afraid that if I kept covering for Fuck, not only would he be ruined, but you and Lan An would be dragged down with him. She spoke through her tears, every word feeling like it was being ripped straight from her heart. My whole life, I thought Fuck was weak and lacked your strength, so I had to love him more. Whenever he made a small mistake, I defended him. Whenever he owed a little, I paid for it. Whenever he cried, I softened. I thought I was saving him, but I ended up raising someone who knows no fear, no shame, and no responsibility. I looked at my mother. The woman before me was no longer the sharp-tongued, stubborn Mrs. Han who always used tears to pressure her son. She was just a failed mother, finally seeing what the child she pampered most had truly become. My mother turned to Lan An, who was leaning against Mrs. Thuan, her face pale and her eyes red. My mother took 2 steps forward and suddenly collapsed in the middle of the hospital hallway. She knelt before her daughter-in-law, her trembling hands resting on the cold tile floor. Lan An, I am sorry. Lan An looked down at her, tears silently streaming down her cheeks, but she didn't reach out to help her up, nor did she speak any words of forgiveness. She only turned away, her thin shoulders trembling slightly. Mrs. Thuan held her daughter close, her own eyes red, yet she remained silent. Some apologies come too late. Speaking them doesn't mean all wounds can be erased. My mother bowed her head to the tile floor, sobbing without a sound. I stood there, my cheek still stinging from the slap, but my heart ached many times more. I don't know whether to pity my mother, be angry with her, or mourn for my own family. A family that could have been normal, that could have loved each other decently, is now shattered by favoritism, greed, and misguided protection. The investigating officer closed the file and said softly, "We will need to hold a formal session later today." I nodded, but my mind was blank. Fuck has been arrested. My mother turned in her youngest son with her own hands. Lan An turned her face away from her mother-in-law's apology. In that moment, I understood that some things break not with a loud crash like shattering glass, but much more silently. It lies in the eyes of a wife who no longer believes she is protected. It lies in the slumped back of a mother who has just realized she was wrong her entire life. And it weighed so heavily on my heart that I knew no matter how things ended, this family would never be the same again. After that day at the hospital, everything happened so fast that sometimes I couldn't believe it was real. Fuck was detained for investigation regarding fraud, using forged documents, and illegally selling internal company files. The debts he had kept hidden all this time were also brought to light one by one. App debts, gambling debts, crypto losses, and high-interest loans totaled nearly 3 billion dong. Creditors who had never shown their faces before also started coming forward. Some called, some sent debt notices, and some even brought handwritten contracts right to the police station. I sat in the office looking at each file laid on the table, feeling as if I were watching my brother's life being stripped away layer by layer. The youngest child my mother always called naive had finally become a man over 30 living on lies, dependency, and greed. My mother sold the old house after nearly 2 months. It was the house my father left behind before he passed away. When we were kids, Fuck and I would sit on that porch eating ice pops every summer afternoon. Every corner and every crack in the tiles held memories of our family. Yet, in the end, that house had to be sold to pay off the debts of the youngest child my mother had spent her whole life protecting. I went with Mom the day we signed the house sale papers. Mom wore her old brown shirt. Her hair had turned much grayer in just a few short months, and she sat at the notary table with a shaking hand that couldn't even sign her name straight. The buyers were a young couple. They spoke very politely, but I still saw my mother turn away to wipe her tears when she heard them discussing renovating the kitchen. When we stepped out of the notary office, my mother stood on the steps for a long time. She looked out at the traffic, her voice so faint it was barely a whisper. In the end, I couldn't save the house. I stood beside her, not knowing what to say. There are losses that cannot be comforted by a few words of encouragement, especially when one knows they pushed everything to that point with their own hands. After what happened with Fuck, no one in the family blames me anymore. Those who once called me ungrateful and came to my company to pressure me now just sigh when they see me. A distant aunt once called me aside and choked up, saying, "I thought you were just being arrogant because you were rich, but now I realize how much you carried for him." I just gave a faint smile. Truth be told, by then, I no longer felt the need for anyone to understand me. There are things that, once they have passed, you only have enough strength to move on, rather than wanting to explain who was right or wrong. My company also suffered heavy losses after the document leak incident. The biggest contract of the year fell into the hands of a competitor. Some clients began to be cautious, fearing their information was no longer secure. I had to cancel plans to expand the new warehouse, cut many investments, and put several ongoing projects on hold. There were nights I sat alone in my office until dawn, looking at the plan with every item crossed out in red, feeling a void in my heart. But strangely, at that moment, I wasn't as pained by the money as I used to be. What exhausted me the most was every time I turned to look at Lan Ann. Since everything happened, she has become much quieter. There are no more gentle questions when I come home from work, and no more sitting beside me to help with work as before. Lan Ann still takes care of me, still makes me a cup of ginger tea every night, but there is always a very sad silence in her eyes. One night near the end of autumn, as we lay beside each other, Lan Ann suddenly asked me very softly, if I hadn't woken up after the surgery that day, would your mother have come to the hospital to see me even once? I lay still. That question was weightless, yet it hurt more than all the accusations combined. I wanted to say something to defend my mother, but in the end, I couldn't open my mouth because even I didn't know the answer. A long time later, I just bowed my head and covered my face, and for the first time in many years of adulthood, I burst into tears like a child. Lan Ann said nothing more, she just silently placed her hand on my shoulder. The touch was so light it was almost weightless, yet it made my heart ache deep inside. I understood that this woman had endured for far too long. She didn't need a husband who only knew how to stand in the middle to keep the peace. What she needed was the feeling of being protected, chosen, and placed in the most important position in her man's life. A few months later, Lan Ann's health gradually recovered. The surgical scar remained, and she still felt dull pain when the weather changed, but at least her complexion was healthier than before. As for me, after everything, I took the initiative to completely cut off the ambiguous boundaries with my side of the family. I rented a different house further away from the old neighborhood. It wasn't as big as the previous apartment, but it was quiet. I still provided monthly living expenses for my mother and took her to the doctor when needed. But I no longer allowed her to interfere in our married life. After selling the house, my mother became much quieter. She called less often and no longer made the accusations she once did. Sometimes I visited the small room she rented, seeing her sit alone staring out the window for a long time. The woman who once fiercely defended her youngest son regardless of right or wrong had finally aged in less than a year. On the day Fuck was sentenced, it rained very heavily. I stood at the back of the courtroom, watching my younger brother in his prisoner uniform, head bowed before the bench. My mother sat in the row behind, her hands gripped so tightly they were turning white. When the judge read out the final sentence, she let out a very faint cry and fainted on the spot. The whole courtroom was in an uproar. I rushed over with a few others to support her. In that chaos, Fuck was led past where I stood. He turned his head to look at me, his eyes bloodshot, his face so haggard he was almost unrecognizable. Quote, "Big brother," his voice trembled. I was wrong. I stood still, watching my younger brother being led through the cold iron door at the end of the hallway. In that moment, I realized that in my heart, there was no more anger, only pain. Pain for a family that was once so normal, pain for a mother who loved her child the wrong way, and pain for a younger brother spoiled to the point of losing his own self-respect. And it hurts because it took me too long to realize that misplaced tolerance sometimes just helps mistakes grow. That evening, for the first time in many months, I took Lan Ann for a walk around the lake near our home. The year-end breeze blew softly over the water, the city lights were bright, and traffic was as noisy as ever, yet my heart felt strangely at peace. Lan Ann held my arm very lightly. Her steps were still slower than before as her health hadn't fully recovered, but her eyes were no longer as tired as when she was first discharged. I looked down at my hand holding my wife's. That hand was once bruised from IV drips, trembling with pain, and had many times given up in despair. Yet, in the end, she still chose to stay by my side. I squeezed Lan Ann's hand gently and whispered, "From now on, I only want to be kind to the person who is sincere with me." Lan Ann didn't answer. She just leaned her head on my shoulder, very lightly. Behind us, the city remained bright and noisy as if nothing had ever happened. But for the first time in a long while, I felt that my life had truly turned to a new chapter.